The dusty auction barn in Oklahoma City buzzed with the energy of big money and bigger egos as the state's most prestigious cattle auction reached its climax. Wealthy ranchers in $1,000 boots and custom Stetsons filled the bleachers, their eyes gleaming with the predatory focus of men accustomed to acquiring the finest breeding stock money could buy. The air was thick with the scent of hay, leather, and the unmistakable aroma of serious business being conducted. For the past 3 hours, magnificent bulls had paraded through the ring, each one commanding prices that could buy luxury cars. Bloodlines were discussed like royal genealogies, and bidding wars erupted over animals whose genetics promised future championships and breeding rights worth millions. Preston Hawthorne, owner of Hawthorne Estates and the region's most influential cattle magnate, had already secured 2 prize bulls for over $50,000 each, barely blinking at the astronomical figures. Then came lot number 47. The moment Caesar limped into the ring, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The 3-year-old Charolais mix was a study in contradiction. His frame still carried the substantial bulk of his breed at nearly 1,800 pounds, but his cream-colored coat was dull and patchy, marked by months of neglect and poor nutrition. Most glaringly, he favored his right front leg, creating an uneven gait that immediately branded him as damaged goods in the eyes of the assembled experts. "Well, folks, here we have lot 47, the auctioneer announced, his voice notably lacking the enthusiasm he had displayed for previous animals. "Caesar, age 3, from Millfield Ranch. Now, I'll be honest with you, this bull has had some challenges, but someone might find potential in him for a breeding program willing to take on a rehabilitation case." The response was immediate and brutal. Laughter rippled through the crowd like a wave of cruel judgment. Preston Hawthorne leaned back in his premium seat, his weathered face creased with disdain. "Good Lord, who allowed that pathetic specimen into a serious auction? That animal belongs in a processing plant, not a breeding program." "Look at that limp," called out another prominent rancher. "Genetic defect, guaranteed. Whoever buys that bull will be throwing good money after bad. That's exactly the kind of inferior bloodline that's ruining the industry." The insults continued to flow freely, each comment more cutting than the last. "I've seen better conformation in dairy cows," someone shouted. "That thing couldn't sire a decent calf if his life depended on it." The assembled elite seemed to take genuine pleasure in their collective dismissal of Caesar, as if his presence in their exclusive auction was a personal insult to their refined sensibilities. But in the back corner of the auction house, far removed from the jeering crowd of cattle royalty, sat Marcus Rivera, a 45-year-old auto mechanic whose presence at such an elite event was as unlikely as it was unnoticed. His work-worn hands bore the permanent stains of engine oil and honest labor, and his simple clothes stood in stark contrast to the designer Western wear surrounding him. Marcus had driven 3 hours from his modest family farm in rural Texas, carrying his entire life savings of $500 in carefully counted bills. Unlike the wealthy ranchers who saw only dollar signs and genetic charts, Marcus observed Caesar with different eyes. His years as a mechanic had taught him to look beyond surface damage to assess true potential, to see what could be rather than simply what was. While the crowd focused on Caesar's obvious flaws, Marcus noticed the intelligence burning in the bull's dark eyes, the proud way he held his massive head despite the humiliation being heaped upon him. Most importantly, Marcus's trained eye caught something the so-called experts had missed entirely. Caesar's limp wasn't consistent with a genetic defect or structural damage. The bull was clearly favoring his left side, but his right leg moved with natural strength and grace when he shifted his weight. This wasn't a crippling deformity. It was an injury, likely from a fall or mishap, something that could heal with proper care and nutrition. "Let's start the bidding at $1,000, the auctioneer called out with forced optimism. The silence that followed was deafening. Not a single hand moved in the crowd. "All right then, how about $500? More silence, punctuated by fresh waves of derisive laughter. "Come on, folks, someone must need a lawn ornament. 300? Still nothing. Caesar stood motionless in the center of the ring, his breathing steady and controlled despite the verbal assault being launched at him from every direction. His dignity in the face of such cruel treatment only reinforced Marcus's growing conviction that this was no ordinary animal being dismissed so carelessly. $200? $150? Surely someone can find a use for this animal at $100. The auctioneer's voice grew increasingly desperate with each failed attempt to generate even token interest. Marcus felt his heart breaking as he watched the proud bull endure wave after wave of humiliation. Every fiber of his being wanted to raise his hand and end Caesar's suffering, but doubt gnawed at his confidence. What did a simple mechanic know about raising bulls? What if the experts were right? What if he was about to waste money his family desperately needed for basic necessities? Last chance, folks. $100 for lot 47, or he goes back to where he came from, the auctioneer announced with grim finality. Marcus knew exactly what going back meant. The slaughterhouse, where Caesar would be reduced to nothing more than hamburger meat, his potential forever unrealized, his dignity finally stripped away along with his life. Just as Marcus was gathering the courage to bid, something happened that changed everything. A small girl, perhaps 7 years old, had somehow slipped away from her parents and made her way down to the ring area. She stood at the metal fence separating the crowd from the auction ring, her tiny hand extended toward Caesar through the rails. The massive bull, who had been stoically enduring the crowd's mockery with regal composure, noticed the child immediately. Without hesitation, Caesar moved toward the fence and gently lowered his enormous head, allowing his velvet nose to touch the little girl's palm. The gesture was so tender, so full of trust and gentleness despite everything he had endured, that it took Marcus's breath away. In that single moment of connection between the rejected bull and the innocent child, Marcus saw Caesar's true nature. Not a failed breeding prospect, but a noble creature with a heart as large as his frame. The crowd fell briefly silent, momentarily touched by the unexpected display of gentleness. But the spell was quickly broken by Preston Hawthorne's disgusted snort. "Well, isn't that touching? The reject bull making friends with children. I suppose that's about all he's good for." That callous comment was the final straw for Marcus. His hand shot up just as the auctioneer was raising his gavel to close the bidding. "On hundreds!" Marcus called out, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet auction house. Every head turned to stare at him, hundreds of eyes focusing on the simple mechanic who had dared to bid on the unwanted bull. The expressions ranged from surprise to pity to outright mockery. Preston Hawthorne shook his head in theatrical disbelief. "Well, there's a sucker born every minute. That poor fool just threw away a week's wages on a worthless piece of beef. Someone should warn him that he'll be lucky to get $50 worth of meat off that cripple," another voice added, generating fresh laughter from the crowd. The auctioneer, clearly relieved to finally close the embarrassing spectacle, quickly brought down his gavel with obvious haste. "Sold to bidder 127 for $100. Next lot, please." As Marcus made his way through the jeering crowd to claim Caesar, the whispers and cruel comments followed him like a swarm of locusts. "Poor guy probably thinks he's getting the deal of a lifetime," someone said loudly. "Wait until he tries to breed that liability and gets nothing but veterinary bills and disappointment." But Marcus heard none of it. His entire focus was on Caesar, who watched his approach with those intelligent dark eyes that had first captured the mechanic's attention. As Marcus reached the ring and was handed the lead rope by a clearly embarrassed auction hand, Caesar lowered his head and looked directly into his new owner's weathered face. In that gaze, Marcus saw not gratitude or submission, but a quiet dignity that spoke of noble bloodlines and untapped potential that no amount of surface damage could diminish. He gently placed his calloused hand on Caesar's powerful neck, feeling the strong muscles beneath the neglected coat. "Don't worry, boy," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going home now, and nobody's ever going to laugh at you again. You and I are going to show them all what real worth looks like. If you believe that true value can't be measured by appearance, give this video a like. Every animal deserves someone who sees their potential." As Marcus slowly led Caesar from the auction ring, his limp barely noticeable now that he wasn't being forced to parade for critical eyes, neither the jeering crowd nor the dismissive experts could have possibly imagined what they had just witnessed. The bull they had rejected for a mere $100 was about to embark on a journey that would not only transform his own life, but challenge everything the cattle industry thought it knew about worth, potential, and the true meaning of championship bloodlines. Subscribe to our channel to see how a $100 investment becomes the most shocking comeback story in rodeo history. The 3-hour drive back to Marcus Rivera's modest farm in rural Texas passed in contemplative silence, broken only by the gentle rumble of Caesar's breathing from the trailer behind them. Marcus gripped the steering wheel of his weathered pickup truck, his mind racing with doubts and possibilities in equal measure. What had he done? The voices of the auction house elite echoed in his memory, their cruel laughter and dismissive comments playing on repeat like a broken record of regret. But every time uncertainty threatened to overwhelm him, Marcus glanced in his rearview mirror at the trailer carrying his $100 investment, and something deep in his gut told him he had made the right choice. There had been something in Caesar's eyes, a spark of intelligence and nobility that no amount of surface neglect could extinguish. The way the bull had gently touched that little girl's hand spoke of a character that transcended physical imperfections. The Rivera farm was nothing like the sprawling estates owned by the cattle barons at the auction. 15 acres of modest pasture land surrounded a simple ranch house that Marcus had built with his own hands, board by board, during evenings and weekends over the course of 5 years. A small barn housed their 3 horses and a handful of chickens, while a vegetable garden provided fresh produce for the family table. It wasn't much by industry standards, but it was home, and it was built on love rather than profit margins. Marcus's wife, Elena, emerged from the house as the truck pulled into the gravel driveway, her expression shifting from curious to concerned as she noticed the cattle trailer. At 42, Elena carried herself with the quiet strength of a woman who had learned to stretch every dollar and make miracles happen with limited resources. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her work clothes spoke of a life spent caring for animals and family with equal dedication. "Marcus, what did you do?" she asked, though her tone carried more curiosity than accusation. 20 years of marriage had taught her to trust her husband's instincts, even when they led him down unconventional paths. "I bought us a bull," Marcus replied simply, climbing down from the truck cab. "His name is Caesar, and he's going to surprise a lot of people." Elena walked to the back of the trailer and peered through the slats at the massive form inside. Caesar stood quietly, his head held high despite the cramped quarters. Even in the dim light of the trailer, she could see the intelligence in his dark eyes, the same quality that had captured her husband's attention at the auction. "He's beautiful," she said softly, and Marcus felt a rush of relief that his wife saw what he had seen. "But Marcus, how much did you spend? We've been saving for Sophia's college fund, and the truck needs new brakes and—" $100, Marcus interrupted gently. Elena's eyes widened in disbelief. $100 for a bull that size? Marcus, what's wrong with him? As they unloaded Caesar into the small paddock adjacent to the barn, Marcus explained everything. The auction house cruelty, the dismissive experts, the way Caesar had been treated like worthless, damaged goods. Elena listened in growing indignation, her protective instincts aroused by the story of unnecessary suffering. "Well then," she said firmly, rolling up her sleeves as Caesar explored his new surroundings with cautious optimism, "we'll just have to prove them all wrong, won't we?" The first week of Caesar's rehabilitation was a revelation. Marcus had been correct about the bull's limp. Within days of proper nutrition and gentle exercise, the injury began to improve dramatically. What had appeared to be a permanent disability at the auction was clearly the result of poor care and inadequate nutrition. Elena, who had worked as a veterinary assistant before marriage, examined Caesar thoroughly and pronounced him fundamentally sound. "This isn't genetic," she told Marcus as they watched Caesar moving freely around the paddock. "This is what happens when an animal doesn't get proper minerals and vitamins during development. Look at his bone structure, Marcus. This bull has exceptional conformation hidden under that poor condition." More remarkable than Caesar's physical recovery was his temperament. Unlike many bulls who could be aggressive and unpredictable, Caesar displayed a calm intelligence that bordered on the extraordinary. He learned the farm's routines within days, responding to Marcus's voice commands with an eagerness that spoke of genuine cooperation rather than mere submission. The breakthrough moment came during Caesar's second week on the farm. Marcus was repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm when Caesar approached and stood quietly watching the work. Without thinking, Marcus handed Caesar one end of a wire strand while he secured the other end to a post. To his amazement, Caesar held the wire steady, maintaining perfect tension until Marcus could complete the attachment. "Did you see that?" Elena called from the garden, where she had been watching the interaction with growing wonder. He understood exactly what you needed from him. As word of Caesar's remarkable intelligence spread through their small rural community, neighbors began stopping by to witness the phenomenon for themselves. Jake Morrison, a local rancher who had known Marcus for years, was skeptical until he saw Caesar respond to complex verbal instructions with precision that would have impressed a trained horse. "Marcus, I've been around cattle my whole life," Jake said, shaking his head in amazement as Caesar carefully maneuvered around a delicate flower bed without crushing a single plant. "I've never seen anything like this. Where did you say this bull came from?" That question had been nagging at Marcus as well. Caesar's behavior suggested breeding and training that went far beyond typical ranch stock. The bull's responses were too sophisticated, too nuanced to be the product of random genetics or basic handling. There was a refinement to his movements, an aristocratic bearing that became more apparent as his physical condition improved. Elena spent hours researching Caesar's background, making phone calls to breed registries and tracking down connections to Millfield Ranch, where Caesar had supposedly been raised. What she discovered sent shockwaves through their quiet farm life. "Marcus, you need to sit down for this," Elena said one evening, her laptop open to a livestock genealogy website. "I found Caesar's registration papers. His full name is Caesar's Golden Legacy, and his bloodline is absolutely incredible." The screen displayed a family tree that read like a who's who of champion genetics. Caesar's grandfather had been a national champion. His great-grandfather, a legendary sire whose offspring commanded premium prices across the country. His mother's line traced back to imported European stock worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. "But that's impossible," Marcus protested. "If his bloodline is that valuable, why was he being sold for $100 at a reject auction?" Elena's investigation revealed the tragic answer. Millfield Ranch had suffered financial collapse when the owner, Jonathan Millfield, had lost everything in a series of bad investments. The ranch's prize stock had been dispersed in a desperate attempt to pay creditors, with Caesar somehow ending up in the general auction, rather than being sold through prestigious breeding channels where his value would have been recognized. "The auction house had no idea what they were selling," Elena explained, her voice filled with awe. "Those experts who were laughing at you were looking at one of the most valuable bloodlines in American cattle breeding, and they couldn't see past his poor condition." As the magnitude of their discovery sank in, Marcus felt a mixture of vindication and responsibility. They hadn't just rescued a bull. They had saved a genetic treasure that represented decades of careful breeding and agricultural heritage. But more than his monetary value, Caesar had proven himself to be exactly what Marcus had seen in those first moments at the auction, a creature of extraordinary character and potential. The transformation was becoming impossible to hide. Caesar's coat had regained its lustrous cream color, his frame had filled out with proper nutrition, and his movement displayed the powerful grace that marked true championship stock. But most remarkably, his intelligence and gentle nature had turned him into something unprecedented, a bull who could work alongside humans with the cooperation and understanding typically associated with the finest working horses. Local veterinarian Dr. Sarah Chen had become a regular visitor to the Rivera farm, documenting Caesar's recovery and studying his unusual behavioral traits. "Marcus, I've been practicing for 15 years, and I've never encountered anything quite like Caesar," she admitted during one of her visits. "His cognitive abilities are off the charts. You're not just looking at valuable breeding stock. You're looking at an animal that could revolutionize how we think about cattle intelligence and training." As winter gave way to spring, Caesar's reputation began to spread beyond their rural community. Agricultural extension agents started visiting the farm, drawn by reports of the remarkable bull who could follow complex instructions and work cooperatively on farming tasks. Each visitor left with the same sense of wonder that had first captured Marcus at the auction. But the most significant transformation wasn't happening to Caesar, it was happening to the Rivera family themselves. Marcus found himself becoming an accidental expert in advanced cattle genetics, while Elena discovered a passion for animal behavior research. Their modest farm was evolving into something unprecedented, a place where championship bloodlines and revolutionary training methods were converging to create something the cattle industry had never seen before. The $100 investment was revealing itself to be the opportunity of several lifetimes, but more than that, it was proving that sometimes the most valuable things in life come disguised as worthless rejects, waiting for someone with the vision to see their true potential. 6 months after the humiliating auction, the annual Texas State Cattle Championship was shaping up to be the most competitive event in decades. The prestigious gathering drew the elite of the cattle industry from across the Southwest, with millions of dollars in prize money and breeding rights hanging in the balance. For men like Preston Hawthorne, the championship represented more than competition. It was a validation of their position at the apex of agricultural aristocracy. Hawthorne arrived at the Fort Worth exhibition grounds with his usual entourage of handlers, veterinarians, and sycophants, confident that his latest acquisition would dominate the breeding bull competition. Thunder King, a magnificent Charolais specimen he had purchased for $75,000 just months earlier, represented everything the industry valued: perfect conformation, impeccable bloodlines, and the kind of aggressive masculinity that translated into premium breeding fees. "This year's championship is going to be a formality," Hawthorne boasted to his assembled cronies as they toured the exhibition barns. Thunder King is genetically superior to anything else in this competition. I expect we'll take home the grand championship without breaking a sweat. The other elite breeders nodded in agreement, their own expensive entries paling in comparison to Hawthorne's investment. The consensus among the industry leaders was clear. This championship would be decided among the usual suspects, the wealthy operations that could afford to purchase proven genetics and hire the finest handlers money could buy. That's why the entry form that landed on Chief Judge Robert Sterling's desk caused such a stir in the administration office. The registration was legitimate, the fees had been paid, but the ownership information seemed almost like a practical joke. Marcus Rivera, listed as a mechanic from rural Texas, had entered a bull named Caesar's Golden Legacy in the breeding class competition. Golden Legacy? Sterling muttered, cross-referencing the name against his registry database. I know that bloodline. That's Millfield stock, some of the finest genetics in the country. But Millfield Ranch went bankrupt months ago. Sterling's confusion deepened as he studied the registration papers. The bull's pedigree was absolutely spectacular, tracing back to some of the most valuable bloodlines in North American cattle breeding. But the owner was listed as a small-time farmer with no history in competitive breeding, and the registration had been filed just weeks before the entry deadline. Meanwhile, Marcus and Elena worked tirelessly to prepare Caesar for his first major competition. Unlike the wealthy operations with their teams of professional handlers, the Rivera family was doing everything themselves. Marcus had taken vacation time from his auto shop, while Elena had arranged for neighbors to watch their children so she could focus entirely on Caesar's preparation. The transformation in Caesar over the past 6 months had been nothing short of miraculous. The limping, neglected animal from the auction had evolved into a magnificent specimen that seemed to embody the very best characteristics of his noble bloodline. His cream-colored coat now gleamed with health, his massive frame carried itself with aristocratic grace, and his intelligent eyes reflected a confidence that came from proper care and genuine affection. But Caesar's most remarkable trait remained his extraordinary intelligence and cooperation. Unlike typical bulls who required constant vigilance and forceful handling, Caesar worked with Marcus like a trusted partner. He responded to subtle voice commands, positioned himself for grooming and preparation without restraint, and displayed a calm dignity that impressed everyone who encountered him. Dr. Sarah Chen had volunteered to accompany the Rivera family to the championship, partly out of professional curiosity about Caesar's unique behavioral traits, but mostly out of friendship and support for a family she had watched transform their lives through dedication and hard work. Marcus, I have to tell you, I'm nervous, Elena admitted as they prepared to leave for Fort Worth. We're going to be competing against people who spend more on a single bull than we make in 5 years. What if we're out of our league? Marcus looked at Caesar, who was watching their preparations with alert interest, and felt the same quiet confidence that had prompted him to bid at that fateful auction. Elena, we're not out of our league. We're playing a different game entirely. Those people at the championship judge value by price tags and reputation. We're going to show them what real worth looks like. The arrival of the Rivera family at the Fort Worth exhibition grounds created exactly the kind of stir Marcus had expected, though not necessarily for the reasons he anticipated. Their modest pickup truck and basic cattle trailer stood in stark contrast to the custom rigs and professional transport vehicles that typically serviced championship events. But it was Caesar himself who truly commanded attention. As Marcus led Caesar from the trailer toward the exhibition barns, a crowd began to gather. Seasoned handlers and breeders who had seen thousands of cattle over their careers stopped their own work to stare at the magnificent bull walking calmly beside the unknown mechanic. Caesar's presence was undeniable. Every line of his body spoke of genetic perfection, refined through generations of careful breeding. "My God," whispered Janet Morrison, one of the competition's most respected judges. "Look at the head on that bull, and that chest depth. I haven't seen conformation like that in years." Word of the mysterious entry spread quickly through the exhibition grounds. Veterans of the cattle industry began approaching Marcus with questions about Caesar's background, their professional curiosity overriding their usual social hierarchies. These weren't wealthy hobby breeders. They were people who had spent their lives around superior cattle, and they recognized exceptional quality when they saw it. Preston Hawthorne was inspecting Thunder King's accommodations when one of his handlers rushed up with news that sent a chill down his spine. "Mr. Hawthorne, you need to see Barn 7. There's a bull there that's causing quite a stir. People are saying he might be serious competition." Hawthorne's first impulse was to dismiss the concern, What could possibly threaten Thunder King's supremacy? But professional paranoia, honed through decades of high-stakes competition, compelled him to investigate. He made his way to Barn 7 with growing unease, surrounded by his usual entourage of paid advisors and hangers-on. The sight that greeted him stopped Hawthorne dead in his tracks. Standing in a simple stall, without the elaborate decorations and professional signage that marked elite entries, was quite possibly the most magnificent bull he had ever seen. Caesar's physical presence was overwhelming. Perfect proportions, ideal muscle development, and a coat that gleamed like burnished cream in the barn's fluorescent lighting. But it was the bull's demeanor that truly unsettled Hawthorne. Caesar stood with a calm dignity that spoke of absolute confidence, his intelligent eyes surveying his surroundings with the alertness of an animal completely comfortable in his own superiority. This wasn't the nervous energy of an animal being pushed beyond his capabilities. This was the serene power of a creature who knew exactly what he was. "Who owns this bull?" Hawthorne demanded, his voice carrying an edge of barely controlled panic. "Some mechanic from Texas," replied one of his handlers, consulting the registration list. "Marcus Rivera. Never heard of him before this entry." Hawthorne studied Caesar more closely, his trained eye cataloging every detail of the bull's conformation. Gradually, a terrible realization began to dawn. The bone structure, the distinctive head shape, the particular way Caesar carried his massive frame, all of it was triggering memories of cattle he had encountered years earlier at exclusive breeding conferences. "Get me the full registration on this animal," Hawthorne ordered, his voice tight with growing dread. "I want to know everything about his bloodline." 20 minutes later, Hawthorne stared at Caesar's pedigree with the expression of a man watching his worst nightmare unfold. Caesar's golden legacy represented everything Hawthorne had spent years trying to acquire. Bloodlines that money typically couldn't buy. Genetics that were usually available only through exclusive breeding arrangements among the industry's most elite operations. "This is impossible," Hawthorne muttered, double-checking the registration details. "How does a mechanic end up with Millfield genetics? Those bloodlines are worth a fortune." The answer came from an unexpected source. Jonathan Millfield himself had arrived at the championship, drawn by reports of a bull carrying his former operation's name. The bankruptcy that had destroyed his life's work had left him broken but not bitter, and he approached Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and hope. "Mr. Rivera," Millfield said, extending his hand with genuine warmth, "I understand you have one of my former bulls. I'd very much like to meet him again." The reunion between Millfield and Caesar was deeply emotional. The bull recognized his former owner immediately, nuzzling the man's shoulder with obvious affection. But what moved Millfield most was seeing the transformation that love and proper care had worked in Caesar's condition and temperament. "Mr. Rivera, I need to tell you something about this bull," Millfield said, his voice thick with emotion. "Caesar was my personal favorite, the most promising young bull I ever raised. When the ranch collapsed, I tried everything to keep him, but the creditors wouldn't listen. To see him like this, healthy and magnificent and clearly loved, it's the best possible outcome for a devastating situation." The conversation that followed sent shockwaves through the exhibition grounds. Millfield confirmed what Caesar's registration papers suggested. This was breeding royalty, genetics that represented decades of careful selection and improvement. More than that, Caesar's intelligence and temperament made him potentially the most valuable breeding bull in the competition. Preston Hawthorne, overhearing portions of the conversation from a nearby stall, felt his confidence crumbling. The mechanic he had mocked at the auction, the sucker who had thrown away $100 on a worthless animal, had somehow acquired what might be the most valuable bull at the championship. The implications were staggering, not just for this competition, but for Hawthorne's entire reputation as a judge of superior cattle. As word spread through the exhibition grounds that the mysterious entry from Texas carried world-class genetics acquired for pocket change, the cattle industry's carefully maintained hierarchies began to shift. Marcus Rivera, the humble mechanic who had trusted his instincts over expert opinion, was about to prove that true value couldn't be measured in dollars spent, but in vision, dedication, and the courage to see potential where others saw only problems. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge everything the elite cattle industry believed about worth, breeding, and the relationship between money and genuine quality. The morning of the championship judging arrived with electric tension that only accompanies truly historic moments. Word of Caesar's remarkable bloodline had spread throughout the exhibition grounds overnight, transforming what should have been routine competition into the most anticipated judging event in recent memory. Crowds gathered around the main ring hours before official start time, drawn by whispered reports of the impossible story unfolding before their eyes. Marcus Rivera stood in Caesar's stall, his weathered hands gently brushing the bull's gleaming coat with movements that spoke of 6 months of daily devotion. The transformation from the neglected animal he had rescued was complete. Caesar radiated the kind of physical perfection that defined championship breeding stock. But more than his appearance, it was Caesar's demeanor that truly set him apart. While other bulls showed signs of stress and agitation, Caesar remained calm and alert, his intelligent eyes reflecting confidence that seemed to transcend the chaos around him. 3 stalls down, Preston Hawthorne was experiencing the most stressful morning of his professional career. Thunder King, his $75,000 investment and supposed guaranteed champion, stood restlessly in his elaborate stall, surrounded by professional handlers working frantically to present him at absolute peak condition. But Hawthorne's confidence had evaporated entirely since discovering Caesar's true identity. Chief Judge Robert Sterling called the competitors to order, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years' experience evaluating the finest cattle in North America. The judging ring filled with the industry's elite entries, each bull representing hundreds of thousands of dollars in investment and years of careful planning. Then Marcus led Caesar into the ring, and the entire atmosphere changed. The bull that entered moved with grace that defied his enormous size, his cream-colored coat catching the arena lights like polished marble. Caesar's presence commanded attention, a serene confidence that made every other bull in the competition seem somehow diminished by comparison. Unlike other entries who required constant management from their handlers, Caesar moved in perfect harmony with Marcus, responding to subtle voice commands with the precision of a seasoned performance horse. "My God," Judge Sterling whispered to his colleague, "look at the natural carriage on that bull. I haven't seen presence like that in decades." The crowd's reaction was immediate and electric. These were people who had spent their lives around cattle, who could recognize exceptional quality regardless of price tag. Caesar's superiority wasn't just visible, it was overwhelming, undeniable, transformative. As judging commenced, Sterling moved systematically through the lineup, his expert eye cataloging every detail of conformation, temperament, and breeding potential. But it quickly became apparent that this wasn't really a competition, it was a coronation. Caesar excelled in every category that mattered, displaying not just perfect physical attributes, but intelligence and cooperation that elevated him beyond mere livestock into something approaching artistry. Judge Sterling completed his evaluation with thorough professionalism, but his conclusion was never really in doubt. When he finally stepped to the microphone to announce results, tension in the arena was palpable. "Ladies and gentlemen, in 30 years of judging cattle competitions, I have rarely seen an entry that so completely embodies the ideals we strive for in breeding excellence," Sterling began, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed arena. "Today's grand champion demonstrates not just genetic perfection, but the kind of intelligence, temperament, and natural ability that defines truly legendary breeding stock." The pause that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. The grand champion of this year's Texas State Cattle Championship is Caesar's Golden Legacy, owned by Marcus Rivera of rural Texas. The explosion of applause that followed was unlike anything the championship had ever experienced. This wasn't just appreciation for a winning animal, it was celebration of a story that had captured the imagination of everyone present. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as Elena and the children rushed into the ring to join the celebration. Preston Hawthorne sat in stunned silence as the ceremony continued around him. The mechanic he had mocked was being presented with a champion's trophy and breeding contract worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Thunder King, his supposed guarantee of victory, hadn't even placed in the top 3. The most devastating moment came when Jonathan Millfield approached Hawthorne directly, his face showing mixture of satisfaction and sadness. "Preston, I want you to meet the bull you said wasn't worth hauling to the meat plant," Millfield said quietly, gesturing toward Caesar. "6 months ago, you told everyone that animal was worthless trash. Today, he's the most valuable breeding bull in Texas." The words hit Hawthorne like physical blows. Around him, industry colleagues who had once deferred to his opinions were now congratulating the Rivera family, their respect shifting toward the humble mechanic who had trusted his instincts over expert consensus. As championship celebration continued into the evening, Marcus found himself surrounded by reporters, breeders, and agricultural officials, all wanting to understand how a $100 investment had become the industry's newest sensation. "Mr. Rivera, what's next for Caesar?" asked a journalist from the National Agricultural magazine. Marcus looked at his family, gathered around the bull who had transformed their lives, and smiled with quiet satisfaction of a man who had always known this day would come. "Caesar's going home," he replied simply. "He's got a farm to help run, and a family who loves him. Success doesn't change who you are. It just gives you a bigger platform to show the world what you've always been." The bull who had been rejected as worthless had proven that true value lies not in price tags or expert opinions, but in the vision to see potential where others see only problems, and the courage to act on that vision regardless of what the crowd believes. Rejected Bull was bought for just $100, but what happened next shocked everyone.